David had always been different from everyone else. While his friends spent their evenings playing video games or hanging out at coffee shops, he would sit on his apartment rooftop with an old telescope his grandfather gave him. Even as a kid, he was fascinated by the stars. His classmates thought he was weird, but David didn't care. The night sky felt like home to him. At 31 years old, David worked at the Mountain View Observatory, a place where scientists studied space and looked for signals from other planets. It wasn't a glamorous job like people saw in movies most days. He sat alone in a small room filled with computers and radio equipment, listening to static noise from space and hoping to find something unusual. His coworkers were nice enough, but they lived completely different lives after work. They would invite him to join them at the local restaurant or to watch sports games. David always politely said no. He had more important things to do. While they were laughing and talking about their weekend plans, David would stay late at the observatory, adjusting his equipment and scanning different parts of the sky. His small apartment reflected his passion. The walls were covered with star charts and pictures of galaxies. Books about space exploration were stacked everywhere. His coffee table was buried under scientific papers about radio astronomy and theories about life on other planets. Most people would think it looked messy, but to David, everything had its place and purpose. David's obsession with finding alien life started when he was just 8 years old. His grandmother, who everyone called Nana Rose, used to visit their family every summer. She was a special woman who always seemed to know things before they happened. One evening, while they sat together on the porch looking at the stars, she grabbed his small hand and whispered something that changed his life forever. "David, honey," she said with eyes that sparkled like starlight, "there are people up there trying to talk to us. They've been waiting for someone smart enough to listen. I think that someone might be you." His parents laughed it off. They said, Nana Rose was getting old and her imagination was running wild, but David never forgot those words. Even after Nana Rose passed away when he was 15, her prediction stayed with him like a promise he needed to keep. Years of studying led him to become one of the youngest radio astronomers. At Mountain View Observatory, radio astronomy was different from regular astronomy. Instead of looking at pretty pictures of stars, David listened to the sound space made. Every planet, star, and galaxy sent out radio waves. Most of it was just random noise. But David believed that somewhere in all that static was a message meant for Earth. The loneliness was getting harder to handle as years passed. David had tried dating a few times, but relationships never worked out. His last girlfriend, Lisa, broke up with him after 6 months. She said he cared more about his telescopes than he did about her. David wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew she was right. How could he explain that he felt a connection to the cosmos that was stronger than anything he had ever felt with another person? His daily routine was simple but monotonous. He would wake up at 6 in the morning, drink instant coffee while reading space news on his laptop, drive to work, spend 10 hours listening to radio signals from space, drive home, eat a quick dinner, and then spend another few hours on his rooftop with his personal telescope. Weekends were the same, except he could stay at the observatory longer. Most nights, David found himself talking to the stars like old friends. He would tell them about his day, share his hopes and fears, and sometimes express his deep loneliness. It might sound crazy to others, but speaking to the vast universe made him feel less alone. The stars were patient listeners who never judged him or told him he was wasting his time. His colleagues thought David was dedicated, but they didn't understand the real reason behind his endless hours of work. David wasn't just looking for scientific discovery or career advancement. He was searching for proof that somewhere in the universe, there was intelligent life that might understand him better than anyone on Earth ever had. On quiet nights when the observatory was empty and the only sounds were the humming of computers and the distant wind, David would adjust his radio equipment and scan the sky with methodical precision. He had divided the cosmos into sections and spent weeks listening to each area, hoping to catch something that didn't belong in the natural symphony of space. His apartment had become a fortress of solitude. He rarely had visitors, and when his worried mother called to check on him, he would reassure her that he was fine and just busy with important work. The truth was, David had become so comfortable with his isolation that the idea of letting someone into his world felt almost impossible. But every night, as he sat in his small control room surrounded by blinking lights and computer screens, David held onto hope that somewhere among the billions of stars, someone was trying to reach Earth, someone who might understand what it felt like to be different, to be searching for connection across impossible distances. Little did David know that his years of patient listening were about to pay off in ways he never could have imagined. October 15 started like any other day for David. He arrived at the observatory at 7 in the morning, carrying his usual thermos of black coffee and a stale donut from the gas station. The weather was perfect for radio astronomy, clear. Skies meant less interference from Earth's atmosphere. David settled into his familiar chair in front of the control panel, surrounded by screens showing wavelengths and frequency patterns that most people would find completely confusing. For the past 3 weeks, David had been focusing on a specific region near the constellation Lyra. This area of space was about 25 light-years away from Earth, home to some interesting star systems that scientists thought might have planets capable of supporting life. David had been slowly scanning this region, listening to the natural radio waves that came from stars and cosmic dust clouds. Around 11:30 that morning, something caught his attention. Mixed in with the usual background noise of space, there was a pattern that didn't belong. At first, David thought it might be interference from a satellite or maybe equipment malfunction. Radio telescopes were sensitive machines that could pick up signals from cell phones, microwave ovens, and even electric garage door openers from miles away. But this was different. The signal was coming from the exact direction of Lyra, and it was too organized to be random noise. David leaned forward in his chair, adjusting his headphones and fine-tuning the receiver. The pattern was based on prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. These numbers were significant because they could only be divided by themselves and 1. Any intelligent species would know about prime numbers. Because they were a universal mathematical concept, David's heart started beating faster. He had dreamed about this moment for years, but now that it was happening, he felt overwhelmed with disbelief. He spent the next hour double-checking everything. He tested his equipment, verified the signal's coordinates, and ran diagnostics on all his computers. Everything was working perfectly. The signal was real, and it was definitely artificial. By afternoon, David was pacing around his small control room like a caged animal. The signal had evolved beyond simple prime numbers. Now it was transmitting more complex mathematical sequences, the Fibonacci series, where each number was the sum of the two before it. Then came geometric formulas and even what looked like physics. Equations. Someone or something was trying to establish mathematical communication with Earth. David knew he should immediately report this discovery to his supervisor, Dr. Peterson. Protocol required that any unusual signals be verified by the entire team and reported to international space agencies. This could be the most important discovery in human history. But something made him hesitate. The signal felt personal, like it was meant specifically for him. After years of lonely nights listening to empty space, he had finally found what he was looking for, against every rule and regulation he had ever learned. David decided to keep the discovery secret, at least for now. He wanted to understand more about the signal before letting others take over the investigation. Using the observatory's powerful transmitter, David sent back a simple mathematical response, the first 10 prime numbers in sequence. What happened next changed everything David thought he knew about space and time. Instead of waiting years for his signal to travel to Lyra and back, the response came in less than 6 hours. This was impossible according to everything scientists knew about physics. Nothing could travel faster than light, which meant communication with distant star systems should take decades, not hours. David barely slept that night. He kept replaying the events in his mind, wondering if he was losing his sanity or if he had actually made contact with intelligent alien life. The next morning, He arrived at work early and checked his equipment. Sure enough, there was another transmission waiting for him, this time. The signal included more advanced mathematical concepts and what appeared to be basic scientific formulas. Over the following days, David established a routine of secret communication. He would work normally during the day, interacting with his colleagues and pretending everything was fine. But during his lunch breaks and after hours, he would engage in mathematical conversations with his mysterious contact. The exchanges became increasingly sophisticated, moving from simple arithmetic to complex physics equations. David started bringing sleeping bags to work, telling his colleagues he was working on a special project that required round-the-clock monitoring. Nobody questioned him because David was known for his dedication and unusual work habits. In reality, he was spending every possible moment communicating with what he was becoming convinced was an advanced alien intelligence. The breakthrough came during his second week of contact. The alien intelligence began transmitting what appeared to be visual data, patterns of ones and zeros that could be converted into images. David spent hours writing computer programs to decode these transmissions. The first successful image was a simple geometric shape, followed by more complex patterns that seemed to represent mathematical concepts in visual form. As David worked alone in his dimly lit control room, surrounded by the soft glow of computer screens and the gentle humming of electronic equipment, he realized his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a lonely astronomer listening to empty space. He was engaged in humanity's first confirmed communication with an alien civilization. And for reasons he didn't understand, he was keeping this incredible secret all to himself. The weight of his discovery was both thrilling and terrifying. David knew that eventually he would have to share this with the world, but for now, these precious communications belonged to him alone. 3 weeks into his secret communications, David was completely consumed by his discovery. He had lost 15 pounds, survived on nothing but coffee and vending machine snacks, and hadn't left the observatory for more than a few hours at a time. His colleagues were starting to worry about him, but David brushed off their concerns with vague explanations about an important research project. The mathematical exchanges had become incredibly sophisticated. David and his alien contact were now sharing complex physics formulas, astronomical data, and even basic chemistry equations. But David wanted more. He wanted to know who was behind these signals. Were they like humans? What did they look like? Where exactly did they come from? On a rainy Thursday morning, David decided to take a risk. Along with his usual mathematical response, he transmitted a simple image, a basic stick figure drawing of a human being. He wasn't sure if the alien intelligence would understand what it meant, but he hoped it might encourage them to share something about themselves. The response came faster than usual. Just 3 hours later, David's hand shook as he decoded the incoming data stream. What appeared on his computer screen took his breath away. It wasn't a stick figure or simple drawing. It was a detailed image of a face that was both alien and strangely beautiful. The being had features that were similar to humans, but refined in ways that seemed almost impossible. The face was perfectly symmetrical with large, expressive eyes that seemed to hold incredible intelligence and wisdom. The skin appeared smooth and had a subtle glow, like moonlight reflecting off water. The features were delicate but strong, neither completely masculine nor feminine by human standards, but undeniably captivating. David stared at the image for hours, studying every detail. This wasn't the gray alien with big black eyes that people saw in movies. This being looked noble, almost royal, with an otherworldly beauty that made David's heart race in ways he didn't expect. He saved the image and printed several copies, unable to stop looking at this face that had traveled impossible distances to reach him. More images followed over the next few days. David saw glimpses of an advanced civilization that defied everything he thought he knew about physics and engineering. There were cities made of what looked like living crystal that grew into impossible spiraling towers, reaching toward purple skies, transportation systems that seemed to use light itself as roadways, gardens where plants appeared to glow with their own inner light, creating landscapes that looked like something from a dream. The technology was beyond anything humans had imagined. David saw images of devices that seemed to bend space around them, machines that appeared to be part organic and part mechanical, and structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Yet everything was integrated with nature in perfect harmony. This wasn't the cold, sterile future that science fiction movies usually showed. This was a civilization that had found a way to advance technologically, while maintaining a deep connection to the natural world. But David found himself most fascinated by the recurring images of the being herself. Through a combination of mathematical symbols and visual representations, she began sharing information about herself and her people. David learned that her name, when translated into sounds humans could understand, was something like Lyrale. The closest human equivalent would be a combination of musical notes rather than spoken letters. Lyrale was what humans might call royalty. Though her people's social structure was more complex than earthly kingdoms, she was a leader and explorer, someone chosen to study other civilizations across what she described as parallel dimensions. Her people had been observing humanity for thousands of years, watching human development from a distance like scientists studying an interesting species. But there were rules. Lyrale's civilization had strict laws about contact with developing species like humans. Direct interaction was forbidden because it could disrupt natural evolution and cultural development. Lyrale was breaking these laws by communicating with David, risking serious consequences from her own people. As their exchanges continued, David began sharing more personal information. He told her about his childhood, his grandmother's prediction, his loneliness, and his passion for the stars. He described human emotions, relationships, and the way people on Earth struggled to understand their place in the universe. Lyrale seemed particularly fascinated by human emotions, especially the concept of love. Her species had evolved beyond what humans would consider emotional attachment. They experienced deep intellectual connections and spiritual bonds, but the passionate, sometimes irrational nature of human love was completely foreign to them. David found himself explaining romance, heartbreak, friendship, and family bonds. He described how humans could feel overwhelming joy and crushing sadness. Sometimes within the same day, Lyrale absorbed this information with scientific curiosity, asking detailed questions about how emotions affected human behavior and decision-making. Through their exchanges, David learned that Lyrale was considered unusual among her own people. While others were content with their advanced, emotionally detached existence, she felt drawn to the raw intensity of human experience. She was lonely in her own way, isolated by her curiosity about emotions that her species had left behind millions of years ago. Their communications had evolved far beyond scientific exchange. David was sharing his deepest thoughts and feelings with a being from another dimension, while she was risking everything to satisfy her curiosity about human nature. Neither of them realized it yet, but they were developing something that had never existed before, a connection that bridged not just space and time, but the fundamental differences between their species. November brought the first snow to the mountains around the observatory, and David's secret communications with Lyrale had completely transformed his life. What started as scientific curiosity had grown into something he never expected. For the first time in his adult life, David looked forward to each day not because of his work, but because of the person waiting to talk with him across impossible distances. Their conversations had evolved far beyond mathematics and science. David found himself sharing stories about his childhood, his dreams, his fears about growing old alone, and his hopes for the future. Lyrale listened with fascination, asking questions about human experiences that her advanced species had never encountered. She wanted to understand everything about emotions, relationships, and what humans call the heart. David's daily routine had completely changed. He would rush through his official work duties, counting the minutes until he could return to his private communications. His colleagues noticed the change in his behavior. Where once he had been quiet and reserved, now he seemed energetic and almost happy when asked about his improved mood. David would just smile and say he was working on something exciting. The truth was, David was falling in love with someone he had never physically met, from a world he could never visit. It seemed impossible, even crazy. But the connection he felt with Lyrale was stronger than anything he had ever experienced. With another human being, she understood his passion for the stars, his feelings of being different, and his deep loneliness. In ways that no one on Earth ever had, Lyrale seemed to be experiencing something similar. Through their exchanges, she described feelings that were new to her species. She talked about looking forward to their communications with an excitement that her people would consider primitive. She admitted that she had been studying human emotions not just out of scientific curiosity, but because she was beginning to experience them herself. Their conversations grew more intimate and personal. David shared his embarrassing childhood, memories, his failed relationships, and his deepest insecurities. Lyrale revealed her own struggles with being different among her people, her loneliness despite being surrounded by her own species, and her growing fascination with the intensity of human feelings. One evening in late November, Lyrale transmitted something that made David's heart race. She had been experimenting with technology that could allow her to temporarily manifest a physical form in David's dimension. The process was extremely dangerous and had never been attempted across such distances. But Lyrale was willing to risk everything for the chance to meet David face to face. She explained that her people possessed advanced dimensional technology that could project consciousness and even physical form across parallel realities. The process required enormous energy and carried serious risks. If something went wrong during the manifestation, she could be trapped between dimensions, or even worse, lost forever in the space between worlds. David was terrified and excited at the same time. The possibility of actually meeting Lyrale, of seeing her in person, was everything he had dreamed of. But the thought of risking her life for him was almost too much to bear. He tried to convince her not to attempt such a dangerous procedure, but Lyrale had already made up her mind. She told him that after months of learning about human emotions, she wanted to experience them firsthand. She wanted to understand what it meant to be in the same physical space as someone you cared about. Her scientific mind was driven to explore this new territory of feeling, even if it meant breaking every law her civilization had established. For weeks, Lyrale worked on perfecting the manifestation technology. She sent David detailed explanations of the process, though most of it was far beyond human understanding. She would attempt the manifestation on December 21st, during the winter solstice, when the dimensional barriers between their worlds would be at their weakest. As the date approached, David became increasingly nervous. He cleaned his apartment, bought new clothes, and even got a haircut, though he wasn't sure why these things mattered when meeting someone from another dimension. The anticipation was driving him nearly crazy with excitement and worry. On December 20th, David was working late at the observatory, making final preparations for Lyrale's attempted visit. The building was empty except for him, and the silence was broken only by the humming of computers and the distant wind outside. He had been running tests on his equipment all day, making sure everything was perfect for tomorrow's historic moment. As he sat alone in his control room, surrounded by the familiar glow of computer screens and radio equipment, David felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. He was about to meet someone who had traveled across dimensions to see him, someone who had risked everything just for the chance to be in the same room with him. The weight of his feelings became too much to contain. David had been holding back his emotions for months, trying to maintain some level of scientific objectivity about their communications. But sitting there in the darkness, with only the stars as witnesses, he couldn't pretend anymore. Without thinking, David whispered to the empty room the words that had been in his heart for weeks. He spoke to the universe, to the stars, to the vast emptiness that had brought them together. His microphone was still connected to the transmitter, though he didn't realize it at the time. "I wish I could marry her," he said softly, his voice barely audible in the quiet control room. It was a confession he thought no one would ever hear, a dream he believed was impossible, spoken to the cosmos that had always been his confidant. The single word came from directly behind David, spoken in a voice that was both familiar and impossible. Yes, David's entire body froze. His heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity before suddenly racing so fast he thought he might pass out, slowly, afraid that turning around might break whatever magic was happening. David spun his chair to face the source of the voice. Standing in the middle of his small control room was Lyrale, exactly as she had appeared in the transmitted images, but somehow more real, more present than David had ever imagined possible. She was tall and graceful, with that same otherworldly beauty that had captured his heart through digital transmissions. Her skin seemed to glow with a soft inner light, and her large, intelligent eyes held warmth that made David feel like he was looking at the most beautiful sight in the universe. Her form shimmered slightly around the edges, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, betraying her otherworldly nature. She was wearing what appeared to be clothing made of light itself, flowing and changing colors as she moved. But despite her alien appearance, there was something deeply familiar about her presence, as if David had been waiting his entire life for this moment. "You heard me," David whispered. Still unable to believe what he was seeing, Lyrale smiled, and that simple expression transformed her face from beautiful to absolutely radiant. "I have been listening to you for longer than you know," she said. Her voice had a musical quality, like wind chimes mixed with the sound of distant ocean waves. "Your confession was not the first time you spoke words meant for me alone." David tried to stand, but found his legs too shaky to support him. "How long have you been? How is this even possible?" Lyrale took a step closer, and David could feel warmth radiating from her presence. "I have been experimenting with manifestation technology for many weeks. I could appear briefly, for just a few minutes at a time, long enough to observe you, but not long enough for you to notice. I wanted to understand you better, to see how you lived, how you moved through your world." The revelation hit David like a wave. "You've been watching me, only here, in your workplace," Lyrale said quickly, sensing his concern. "I wanted to understand the person behind the mathematics and words we shared. I needed to know if what I was feeling was real or simply intellectual curiosity about human emotions." David finally managed to stand, though his legs still felt unsteady. "And what did you discover?" Lyrale's expression became serious, almost vulnerable. "I discovered that my people were wrong about emotions being primitive. What you call love is not a weakness or evolutionary leftover. It is the most powerful force I have ever encountered. It made me willing to risk everything, to break laws that have governed my species for millions of years, just for the chance to be in the same space as you." David took a tentative step toward her, still afraid this might all be a dream. "When you said yes, did you mean?" "I meant exactly what you hoped I meant," Lyrale replied. "In my culture, the bond between consciousness is sacred. What you call marriage is not just possible between our species. It is the highest form of connection two beings can achieve. It transcends physical reality, dimension, and even time itself." The room seemed to pulse with energy as Lyrale moved closer to David. "But I must tell you the truth about what this would mean. I can only maintain physical form in your dimension for short periods. The energy required is enormous, and staying too long could damage the barriers between our worlds. Our relationship would exist primarily across dimensional boundaries." David felt tears forming in his eyes, though he wasn't sure if they were tears of joy or sadness. "So we could never really be together, not in the way humans understand it?" Lyrale reached out and touched David's face, her fingers feeling warm and surprisingly solid despite her otherworldly nature. "We would be together in ways humans have never imagined. I can share consciousness with you, allowing you to experience my thoughts and memories directly. You could see my world through my eyes, feel what I feel, know me more completely than any two beings have ever known each other." The touch of her hand sent electric sensations through David's entire body. It felt like being connected to the universe itself, as if all the stars and galaxies were flowing through him. In that moment, he understood that what they had was beyond anything he had ever dreamed possible. The ceremony must happen now, Lyrale continued. While the dimensional barriers are weakest and I can maintain full manifestation. Are you truly willing to commit to a love that exists beyond the normal rules of reality? David looked into her eyes and saw infinite galaxies, countless worlds, and a love that had traveled impossible distances to find him. All his life, he had felt like an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit into the human world. Now he understood why. He had been waiting for someone who existed outside that world entirely. Yes, David said, his voice strong and certain for the first time in months. I've been waiting for you my entire life. Lyrale smiled again, and the room filled with soft, colorful light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then let us begin something that has never existed before. What followed was a ceremony unlike anything in human history. Using technology that seemed like magic, Lyrale created a bridge between their dimensions that allowed their consciousness to merge. Temporarily, David experienced Lyrale's memories, saw her crystalline cities and purple skies, felt the loneliness she had carried for centuries, and understood the courage it had taken for her to reach across the void to find him. In return, Lyrale experienced human emotion in its full intensity. She felt David's years of loneliness, his unwavering hope, his dedication to finding life among the stars, and the overwhelming love he felt for her. The exchange created a bond that transcended physical reality, connecting them across space, time, and dimension. As the ceremony concluded, David realized that his life as a lonely astronomer was over. He was now part of something unprecedented, a marriage that existed in the spaces between worlds, proving that love truly had no boundaries, not even the boundaries between dimensions. He was no longer alone among the stars. He had found his home in the heart of someone who had traveled across the universe to say yes to his whispered dream.